She carried the tray with her left hand, which was not her dominant hand, and she did it so smoothly that most people would not have noticed. Cillian Voss noticed. He noticed because he noticed things. It was not a virtue. Exactly. More a condition that had developed over 20 years of operating in environments where missing a detail could cost a person something they could not get back. He noticed the way she shifted the tray at the door, the specific adjustment of balance that a person made when they were compensating for something without wanting to appear to be compensating. He noticed that she set the tray on his desk with a quarter turn that put her right side away from him. He noticed that when she straightened and turned to go, she moved through the doorway with 2 inches of extra clearance on the right. The way someone moved when they had learned, through recent and specific experience, that door frames were something to avoid. He did not say anything. He picked up his coffee and looked at the reports on his desk and did not say anything. Sable Okafor, 29, had been working for him for 6 weeks. She had come through the household service he used, which vetted its candidates carefully and which Cillian used specifically because careful vetting meant fewer complications. And her file had been unremarkable in the way that good employees' files were unremarkable, consistent, clean, without the particular gaps and over-explanations that signaled someone managing a story rather than reporting a history. She was good at her work. She was quiet in a way that was not timid, a difference he had learned to distinguish, because timid people were unpredictable in ways that quiet people were not. She did not adjust her behavior when he was in a room, which was rarer than it should have been, and which he had registered in the first week as a quality worth preserving. He looked at the door through which she had just left. He picked up his phone and called Rook. Rook's name was actually Marcus, but he had been called Rook since he was 22 because he moved in straight lines and held territory and was very difficult to dislodge once positioned, which described both his chess playing and his professional approach with an accuracy that had made the name stick. He was 41 now and had been with Cillian for 14 years and answered the phone before the second ring. "I need to know who's running protection in the Pilsen area," Cillian said. "Specifically the residential blocks around the 22nd and Halstead corridor." A pause. Not surprise. Rook did not produce surprise audibly, but the pause of a man recalibrating based on new information. "That's outside our territory. I know where it is. Timeline. Today." Another pause. Shorter. "I'll call you." Cillian set his phone down and looked at the reports on his desk and did not read them. He looked instead at the tray on the corner of his desk, the coffee cup, the small plate with 2 biscuits that he never ate, but that Sable included every morning anyway, because the previous occupant of her position had included them, and she maintained the standard without being instructed. And he thought about the specific angle of compensation he had watched her use at the door, which was not the angle of a person with a recent sprain or a general soreness, but the angle of a person working around a specific structural compromise. He had broken his own right arm once, at 31. In a circumstance he did not spend time revisiting. He knew what it looked like to work around a broken arm. He picked up the coffee and drank it and went back to the reports. And by the time he had worked through the first stack, Rook had sent him a text times 3 operators. The Sable brothers and their collector network. They run 6 blocks in that corridor. Call you at 5. Cillian read the text. He set the phone down. He read the reports for another 3 hours with the specific focused attention of a man who has put something in a separate room in his mind and locked the door until the appropriate time, which was a skill he had developed early and used constantly, and which was, at this particular moment, working less efficiently than usual. Sable did not know he had noticed. She had been careful. She had been careful every day for 4 weeks, since the Sable brothers' collectora man she knew only as Petir, which was probably not his name, had come to the building on a Tuesday morning and told her the envelope she had slipped under the super's door the previous Friday was $17 short. She had told him she didn't have $17 more until Friday. He had told her that was inconvenient for everyone. The three of them, Petir, and the two men he had brought, which was two more than the situation required, and which told her exactly what the situation was going to be had, made their point with the efficiency of people who had made this particular point many times before and needed only a few minutes to make it clearly. She had taken the bus to the 24-hour pharmacy at midnight and bought a splint and medical tape and 2 boxes of ibuprofen and a cold pack, and had come home and sat on the floor of her bathroom for a while before she was able to do what needed to be done. In the morning, she had called the household service and told them she had a family matter and would be late on Wednesday. She had not been late. She had arrived on time because she needed the work, and because being late drew attention she could not afford. She had also, 3 days later, called the police. The officer she spoke to had been not unkind. He had been the specific not unkind of a person who was going through the motions of a process they had completed many times and which they knew from experience was not going to produce anything. And he had taken her information and her description and had said someone would follow up, and no one had followed up. The following week, 2 men she had not seen before had come to the building and spoken to the super, and then knocked on her door and explained, with the patient tone of a teacher repeating something to a student who had failed to understand it the first time, that she appeared to have filed a police report based on a misunderstanding of the situation, and that misunderstandings of this kind had a way of making the original situation significantly worse. She had not filed anything else. She had bought long-sleeved shirts in 3 colors: navy, gray, black, and had practiced her left-handed paw until it was reliable, and had learned which tasks in which rooms required which adaptations, and had become, over 4 weeks, quite accomplished at being a person with a broken arm in a world that had not noticed and was not going to notice, except that she had the persistent and unexamined feeling, since this morning, that she had been noticed. She could not have said why. He had not said anything. He had not looked at her any differently than he usually looked at her, which was with the attentive absence of a person whose attention was elsewhere and who registered his immediate environment as background. He had picked up his coffee and gone back to his work, and she had left the room and nothing had happened. And yet, she was in the kitchen at 4 in the afternoon, preparing the evening tray, when Jordan Cook, 63 years old and deeply opinionated about everything that occurred within 50 feet of her, kitchen came in from the service entrance with a delivery and stopped at the counter and looked at Sable with the expression she used when she had an opinion she had decided to share. "You're moving differently today." Jordana said. "I'm tired," Sable said. Jordana looked at her for a moment. "You've been tired every day," she said, in the tone of someone filing an observation for later use. She set the delivery on the counter and began unpacking it. "Mr. Voss called down this afternoon." Sable looked up. "Asked me to make sure the Thursday menu included something with turmeric." Jordana said this without inflection, in the voice she used when she was reporting information without editorializing about it, which was different from her normal voice and therefore notable. "I haven't cooked with turmeric in 6 months. He's never requested it before." Sable looked at the tray she was preparing. Turmeric was an anti-inflammatory. You found it in the supplements section of a pharmacy, next to the things people bought when they were dealing with joint pain, swelling, chronic injury. You also found it listed in the literature that the pharmacy printed on the back of their generic brochures about managing as a dietary support for bone healing. She looked at the tray. She looked at her hands, one of which was operating with full competence, and one of which was cooperating well enough that most people would not notice it was not. He had noticed. She stood in Jordana's kitchen with this information and thought about what it meant and concluded that she did not know what it meant and that not knowing was going to be, for the moment, what she had to work with. "Tell him I'll make sure it's incorporated," she said, in her ordinary voice, the one she used when she was doing her job and not the one she used when she was receiving information that required processing. Jordana said nothing further. Sable picked up the tray with her left hand, which was not her dominant hand, and carried it down the hallway, and her right arm did not touch the door frame on the way out. Rook called at 5, as he had said he would. Cillian was at the window of his office, looking at the street, which was something he did when he was thinking and which he had been doing for approximately 40 minutes. He picked up on the first ring. Victor and Stefan Sabo. Rook said, "Brothers, they've been running protection in that corridor for about 3 years. Started small 2 blocks and expanded, currently covering 6 residential blocks and 1 commercial strip. A pause. They have a contact in the 21st district. 1 officer, mid-level. Not worth much, but enough to make complaints disappear." Cillian said nothing. "There's more." Rook said, "I pulled incident reports for the area. 8 separate complaints in the last 6 months that went nowhere. The pattern is consistent. Someone files, gets a visit, doesn't file again." Another pause. Shorter. "One of them was filed 9 weeks ago. The complainant's address is in our household services records. The name is Sable Okafor." Cillian looked at the street. "She filed and they went to her." Rook said, "The report was closed a week after she filed it. She hasn't filed anything since." Cillian was quiet for a moment. The 3 men who went to her. Petir Kasarov. He's the collector for those blocks. I can get you the other 2. Get me all 3. He paused, and the contact in the 21st. Timeline. Cillian looked at the street, at the ordinary Tuesday evening traffic, the people coming home from work, to the city doing what it did, regardless of what he was about to do. "Tonight," he said. He ended the call. He stood at the window for a while longer, not thinking about the logistics. Those would arrange themselves, as they always did. Because Rook was good at logistics, and Cillian was good at making decisions that Rook could then execute. He was thinking about a woman who had filed a police report 9 weeks ago and been visited and warned and had not filed again, who had bought long-sleeved shirts and learned to pour with her left hand and had carried a tray into his office this morning with the smooth compensation of someone who had been doing it long enough that it had become a second nature she had not asked for. He was thinking about 8 other complaints that had gone nowhere, and the 7 other people who had learned the same lesson Sable had learned. And the 3 years those 6 blocks had been operating this way, while Cillian's attention had been elsewhere because it had not needed to be there. He was thinking about that last part specifically. He stayed at the window until his phone lit up with a text from Rook Times. All 3 confirmed. Kasarov, +2, also the officer, ready when you are. Cillian put his phone in his pocket and went to get his coat. Rook's full report arrived in Cillian's secure inbox at 6:47 the following morning, which was earlier than Cillian had expected and which meant Rook had been working through the night, which was not unusual for Rook when he was running a thread that had more in it than the initial pull had suggested. Cillian read it at his desk with coffee he had poured himself, because Sable did not arrive until 8, and he had been at the desk since 5:30, which was earlier than usual, even for him. He read the report twice, then he sat with it for a while. The Sabo operation was larger than the 6 blocks Rook had identified the previous afternoon. The 6 blocks were the current footprint, but the network behind it was structured across 4 neighborhoods, with Victor Szabo handling finances and Stefan Szabo handling operations, and a third party named Dren functioning as intermediary between the brothers and the police contact in the 21st District, a sergeant named Furco, with 18 years on the force and a secondary income that had been funding a lake house in Wisconsin for the past 2 years. The 8 complaints in the previous 6 months were the documented ones. Rook had spoken to 3 people in the area through intermediaries and been told that the actual number of incidents was significantly higher, that most people in the affected blocks had stopped considering the formal complaint process as viable sometime in the previous 18 months, and that the collection schedule ran on a monthly basis with a penalty structure for late payment that was, in its way, more systematic than many legitimate lending operations Cillian had dealt with professionally. He read the section about Sable's complaint separately from the rest of the report. which was not something he made a decision to do, but which happened because the relevant paragraph was halfway down page 4, and he stopped at it and did not continue for several minutes. The complaint had been filed on a Thursday. The report number was recorded. The responding officer had been a patrol unit, not Furco's district, which meant the initial filing had gone in cleanly. It had only been suppressed afterward, when Furco's network had flagged it and Dren had arranged the visit. The visit had occurred on a Wednesday, 8 days after the complaint was filed. 2 men, unidentified in the police report because they had not been identified to the police, had spoken to the complainant at her residence. The complaint had been withdrawn the following day. Withdrawn, not dropped. The officer who had closed it had used the specific language that indicated the complainant had contacted the precinct and requested that no further action be taken, which was the language used when someone had been sufficiently discouraged to make the administrative closure of the file in their own name. Cillian set the report down. He had been in business, one way or another, for 20 years, and in that time he had developed a set of territories and adjacencies and non-interference agreements that covered his operations with a reasonable degree of stability. The Sable network had been in his peripheral awareness for approximately 18 months, which was when it had first appeared in Rook's routine regional monitoring. At the time, Rook had noted it as a small-scale local protection operation with no direct relevance to Cillian's interests, and had filed it accordingly. Cillian had read the note and agreed with the assessment and had not thought about it again. This was the part he was sitting with. He had known. Not the specifics, not Furco or Dren or the 8 complaints or the lake house in Wisconsin, but the shape of it. A protection operation in a residential corridor running on the vulnerability of people who had no effective recourse. He had known that shape existed in that area, and he had assessed it as not his problem, and he had been correct by every measure he normally applied to such assessments, and incorrect by at least one measure that he was only now reading a report about a woman who had filed a police report and been visited and had bought long-sleeved shirts in 3 colors. Considering, at 7:55 he heard the service entrance open, which was Sable arriving 5 minutes early, as she typically did. He heard her footsteps in the back hallway, heard the kitchen door, heard Jordana's voice briefly, and then quiet. At 8:03 she appeared in the doorway of his office with the morning tray. He watched her come in. He watched the left hand, the slight adjustment at the door, the careful placement of the tray. She set the coffee cup at his right, the way she always did, and straightened, and for a moment she looked at him and he looked at her. And there was nothing in her face that told him she knew anything about what had happened the previous night, or what was still in progress, or what Rook's report said about the complaint she had filed and withdrawn. She turned to go. "Sable," he said. She stopped. She turned back with the expression of someone who had been expecting this for a day and had not decided what to do about it. "Thursday," he said. "Take the day." She looked at him. "I don't need a day. I'm not offering it because you need it. I'm telling you to take it." He picked up the coffee. "Jordana can cover your tasks for 1 day." Sable stood in the doorway for a moment. He watched her process this, not the offer, which was simple enough, but the question underneath it, which was what the offer meant and what taking it would mean, and whether there was a cost she couldn't yet see. He recognized this processing because he had watched it happen once before, the previous morning, in the kitchen doorway, when she had been considering the information about the turmeric. "All right," she said. Her voice was even. "Starting today," he said. "You can leave after the morning round." She nodded once and left. He listened to her footsteps going back down the hall, and then he picked up the phone and called Rook. The remaining 12 were distributed across the network in a way that required more coordination than the first 3 had required, because the first 3 had been straightforward, location known, schedule predictable, outcome achievable in a single night, and the remaining 12 were spread across 2 neighborhoods, with varying degrees of accessibility and with the added complication of Furco, who was a functioning member of the Chicago Police Department and therefore required a different category of handling than the others. Rook had prepared 3 scenarios for the remaining 12, ranging from most to least visible, and Cillian had selected the middle option, which achieved the necessary outcome without producing the attention that the most aggressive option would have generated, and without the incomplete resolution of the most conservative. The middle option required 48 hours, 3 separate teams, and the involvement of 2 people in law enforcement above Fairco's level who had a long-standing arrangement with Cillian's operation and could ensure the administrative processing moved in the correct direction. Cillian gave the authorization, and Rook executed. He was aware that this was not what the situation technically required of him. The 3 men directly responsible for Sable's injury had been handled. The logical next step was to inform Sable, or not, and allow the situation to resolve itself. He was going further than that. He had not yet fully examined why, which was not his usual practice. He typically understood his own reasoning before acting on it, but which he was allowing on this occasion because the reasoning, when he looked at it directly, had something in it he was not yet ready to examine in the full light of a Tuesday morning. Sable spent her unexpected Thursday in her apartment. She cleaned, which was what she did when she had unstructured time, because cleaning was something she was good at, and because it produced results she could see, which was more than could be said for most of the other things she had tried to do about her situation in the past 4 weeks. She made rice and beans because she had the ingredients, and because her brother Kofi had texted that morning asking if she was eating properly, which she was, mostly, though the ibuprofen worked better on an empty stomach, and she had occasionally made the professional judgment that the trade-off was acceptable. Kofi was 22 and in his last year at Illinois State, and knew nothing about the broken arm because she had not told him and was not going to tell him because Kofi would come home and would want to do something about it, and the something he would want to do about it would involve him putting himself in a situation where the Sabo brothers' collectors would encounter him. And Kofi was 22 and in his last year of college, and she was not going to allow that. She sat at her kitchen table with her rice and beans and her phone, and read the 2 texts Kofi had sent since morning, one about a professor he found frustrating, and one a photograph of a tree on the Illinois State campus that he had apparently found aesthetically significant. She sent back 2 responses that were appropriate to each, and then she sat with the phone on the table and thought about Thursday. She thought about what it meant that Cillian Voss had given her a day off without explanation on the specific day after she had become certain he knew about her arm. She thought about what it meant that he had known about her arm and had said nothing to her, had not asked, had not done any of the things that people with authority over your schedule and your employment typically did when they became aware that you had a problem. She thought about the turmeric, which Jordana had confirmed had appeared on the Thursday menu in the form of a soup that Sable had been present for the making of, but had not been required to acknowledge. She was a practical person. She had been a practical person for as long as she could remember, which was partly temperament and partly the specific education of a life that had not rewarded impracticality. She understood the shape of things. She understood that Cillian Voss was a man who operated in a world where people disappeared and reappeared, and the paperwork adjusted accordingly. And she understood that she worked for him, and that being a person who worked for someone like him came with a particular set of parameters. And she had accepted those parameters when she accepted the job, because the job paid well, and the household service had been clear about the general nature of the employer, and she had made an adult decision. She had not expected to be noticed. That was the part that was requiring processing. Not in the way that people meant when they said notice. She was not constructing a story about what it meant, was not allowing herself the specific impracticality of reading significance into a pot of turmeric soup and a Thursday off. She was simply observing that she had been invisible for 4 weeks, successfully, in a house where a very observant man lived, and then she had not been invisible, and the not being invisible had produced turmeric soup and a day off, and the persistent feeling that something was happening that she did not have enough information to assess. She washed her dish. She sat back down at the table. She looked at her right arm, which she had left without the long-sleeved shirt today because she was in her own apartment and could afford it, and which looked like what it was healing, but slowly, and still a significant distance from functional. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. Times the building's collector won't be coming back. If anyone approaches you regarding the previous arrangement, you have my number now. No name, no explanation. She read it twice. She set the phone down and looked at the ceiling of her kitchen for a long moment. Then she picked the phone back up and typed "Times I see," and sent it before she could revise it into something more or less than what it was. She sat at the table for a while with her phone and her healed and unhealed arm, and the particular feeling of a practical person encountering a situation that practicality was not, for the moment, sufficient to fully account for. Outside, the August afternoon did what August afternoons in Chicago did, which was to be emphatic about itself, and Sable sat in her kitchen in her short-sleeved shirt and thought about a man who had noticed a tray carried with the wrong hand and had apparently decided, without being asked and without explaining himself, to do something about it. She had a response to that. She just hadn't figured out yet what the response was. The number 15 was reached by Thursday evening. Rook sent a single text at 11:47 times. Done. All 15. Ferko is managing a situation that will occupy him for some time. The Sabo brothers are no longer a going concern in any of the 4 neighborhoods. Then, after a pause of approximately 90 seconds, the officer from the 21st who suppressed the original complaint has been reassigned to a desk position pending an internal review. The review will not be flattering. Cillian read this at his desk, acknowledged it, and went to bed, which was something he was able to do because he had long ago separated the category of decisions from the category of their executions, and both decisions and executions had been completed, and what remained was the morning. Sable came in on Friday. She had not. On Thursday. Responded further to the text beyond her initial "Times I see," and Cillian had not sent anything further, and the number in her phone sat there without additional context, like a door that had been opened and left for her to decide whether to walk through. On Friday morning, she came in through the service entrance at 7:55, which was her usual time, and she went to the kitchen and she prepared the morning tray and she carried it down the hall and she knocked on the office door and came in. She set the tray on his desk. She set the coffee cup at his right. She set the small plate with 2 biscuits beside it. She did not immediately turn to go. He looked up from the document he was reading. She looked at him with the direct and unornamented expression she used when she had made a decision about something and was in the process of executing it. "Thank you," she said. "For Thursday. The day off," he said. "Yes." A pause. "And the other thing." He looked at her. She looked at him. She had not specified which other thing the text. The 15. The turmeric. The entire sequence of things that had happened since Monday morning, when she had carried a tray with the wrong hand, and he had noticed. She did not specify because she had apparently concluded that specifying was not necessary, that they were both sufficiently aware of the contents of the preceding week to conduct this exchange without a list. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "I know I don't need to." She looked at him steadily. "I'm doing it anyway." He looked at her for a moment. "All right," he said. She turned to go. She stopped at the door, which was a thing she did sometimes, stopped at the door to add something, the way people did when they had prepared what they intended to say, and then found, at the moment of departure, that there was something they had not prepared that had arrived anyway. "The arm is better," she said. "I wanted you to know." He said nothing. "I have a follow-up with a doctor next week," she said. "I'll have an actual assessment then." Another pause. Shorter. The pharmacy splint was adequate, but not ideal. "I know a physician," he said. "He's discreet." I'll have Rook send you the contact." She looked at him from the doorway. Not the expression of someone receiving a large, unexpected gift, and not the expression of someone receiving what they were owed, but something between those two things that he did not have a precise word for. "All right," she said. She left. He sat at his desk for a while after her footsteps had faded and thought about the word adequate, which was the word she had used for the pharmacy splint, and which was, he had found, over the years, the word that people who had spent a long time managing without enough used for things that had done the job without being sufficient. The word for the category of solutions that worked if you had no better options and that you stopped noticing were insufficient because you had run out of energy to notice. Sable, for her part, had spent Thursday night working out what she thought. This was something she did with most things that required thinking. She gave them a specific window, usually the hours between 10 and midnight when she was done with everything that needed doing and not yet ready to sleep. And she used the window the way she used most tools, with focus and without excessive attachment to the conclusion she might reach. The conclusion was what it was. The thinking was the work. What she thought was this: a man she worked for had noticed something she was hiding and had responded not by asking her about it or addressing her directly, but by acting comprehensively and without discussion, on her behalf and on behalf of 7 other people she had never met. He had done this without telling her he was going to do it, had not asked for acknowledgement, had not in any way positioned the action as something requiring her response. The text had been informational, not relational. The day off had been practical. The physician referral had been practical. None of it had been performed. She had experience with people who performed care, which was different from care. Performance had a specific quality she had learned to recognize earlier, particular direction, always toward the performer, always producing something that reflected back on the person doing the caring rather than landing cleanly on the person being cared for. What Cillian Voss had done in the past week had a different quality. It had landed. It had not asked her to receive it in any particular way. It had simply been done and then been set aside, and she had been left to decide what to do with it. She had decided to say thank you, which was the appropriate thing to do, and to let the conversation be what it was, which was brief and direct and not more than it needed to be. She had not decided what came after that. The after was still unclear in a way she was permitting for the moment, because some things required more than one night's window, and this appeared to be one of them. The physician's name was Brennan. He operated a private practice in Lincoln Park that served a specific clientele of people for whom discretion was a professional requirement rather than a preference. And he had been useful to Cillian's operation for 9 years in the way that useful people were useful reliably, without friction, with the particular competence that came from knowing exactly what was expected and exactly what was and was not being asked. Rook sent Sable the contact on Friday afternoon. She called Brennan's office on Monday and had an appointment by Wednesday. Cillian knew this because Rook told him, and he knew that Rook told him because Rook had taken note of the physician referral and had drawn the correct inference about Cillian's interest level and had provided updates accordingly, which was another thing that Rook was for, and which Cillian did not examine too closely as a piece of behavior on his own part. The appointment was at 2 on Wednesday. At 4:15, Sable appeared in his office doorway and said, "Hairline fracture in 2 places. It's healing correctly. He says another 3 weeks and I should have full use." "Good," Cillian said. She looked at him. "He didn't charge me." "No, I'd prefer to pay." "You can take it up with him," Cillian said, "if that's what you want to do." A pause. "You'll tell him not to accept it." "I'll tell him nothing. What you and Brennan arrange is between you." She looked at him for a moment with the expression of a person assessing whether a statement is true and concluding that it is technically true and not entirely true, and deciding what to do with that. "All right," she said, for the 3rd time in 5 days, which was becoming the specific word she used in his company when she had more to say and was choosing not to say it yet. He filed this. She went back to work. He listened to her footsteps and thought about the 3 weeks Brennan had given her, and thought about what 3 weeks meant in the current context, which was that in 3 weeks she would have full use of her right arm and would no longer need to carry trays with her left hand, and would no longer have the particular reason she currently had for the additional carefulness she had been applying to every interaction in this house. And he thought about what would change and what would not change, and concluded that he was thinking about this more than the situation required, and that the appropriate response to that conclusion was to return to the document he had been reading. He returned to the document. He did not read it for approximately 10 minutes. On the following Thursday, the Thursday after the appointment, 2 weeks after the first Thursday, Sable came into his office with the morning tray and set it on his desk and stood for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes," he said. "Why did you go past the 3? She said it simply, not as an accusation, not with the specific weight of a question that is really a statement, but as a genuine inquiry. The kind that came from a person who had been thinking about something long enough to want an actual answer. You could have stopped at the 3. It would have been sufficient." He set down the pen he had been holding. He looked at her. "Do you know how long the operation had been running?" 3 years, roughly. I heard the number. "And in 3 years, how many people do you estimate were in the same situation you were in?" She looked at him. "Many." "Many," he agreed. "And how many of them filed a complaint?" She was quiet for a moment. 8 that were documented. "And what happened to those 8 complaints?" "They were suppressed." A pause. "You're saying you went further because they had been suppressed." "I'm saying I had information that required a more complete response than the immediate situation alone required." He picked up the pen again. "The 3 were not the problem. They were a symptom of the problem." Sable looked at him for a moment. She looked at the tray, and then at him, and then at the door, and then, with the specific consideration of a person making a decision about what to do with information, back at him. "And the fact that one of the 8 was me," she said. "That had no bearing." He held her gaze. "I didn't say that." She was quiet. "I said the information required a complete response." He said, "Both things can be true." She stood in the doorway for a long moment with this. He watched her process it, the way he had watched her process things for the past 2 weeks. Carefully, and without the particular kind of processing that was actually performing. Processing while having already reached a conclusion was genuinely working through it, which was a quality he had come to recognize and which was not common. "All right," she said. Not the 3rd time now, but a different all right, with a different weight to it. The specific all right of someone who has received an honest answer to a genuine question and is integrating it. She left. He sat at his desk and looked at the coffee she had left and thought about both things being true, which was the most he had said about his own reasoning to anyone in a long time, and thought about whether it had been too much or too little, and concluded that it had been the appropriate amount, which was the amount that was accurate and no more. Outside, August was beginning to thin into the first edges of September, which happened in Chicago the way all Chicago seasons happen suddenly and without transition. One day, a different quality of light on the street outside the window. Cillian noticed it the way he noticed things without decision, completely. He picked up the coffee and went back to the document, and this time he read it. 3 weeks passed. They passed in the specific way that 3 weeks passed, when a person had been given a timeline by a physician and had organized their internal expectations around it with awareness, and with the particular quality of attention that came from knowing that something was going to change at the end of them. Sable was aware of the timeline. She assumed Cillian was aware of it too, because Cillian appeared to be aware of most things that occurred in his immediate environment, and the timeline was something she had reported to him directly. She did not know what would change when the 3 weeks were up. She had not constructed a theory about it, which was a deliberate choice, rather than an oversight. She had made the choice in the second of her Thursday night processing windows, when she had determined that constructing a theory would require assumptions she did not have sufficient information to make. and that proceeding without a theory was more honest than proceeding with a bad one. What she had instead was observation. She observed that Cillian Voss had, in the 3 weeks since their conversation about the 3 versus the 15, begun to be present in his own house in a way that was different from how he had been present before. It was a small difference, and she would not have noticed it if she had not been paying the specific kind of attention she had been paying since the Monday with the tray, but it was consistent. He took his coffee in the kitchen on Tuesday mornings rather than at his desk, which meant she was sometimes in the kitchen at the same time. He ate lunch at the dining table on Wednesdays instead of working through it, which meant she passed through the dining room twice in his presence on those days. He asked Jordana, on a Thursday in the 2nd week, to leave the window in his office unlocked, which was a thing he had apparently been doing for some time because Jordana had not questioned it, but which produced the effect that the office smelled of September air instead of climate control, which was a small thing and which Sable noted. She also observed that he did not look at her differently than he had before the 15. This was notable because she had expected some kind of shifter, certain kind of person, having done a large thing on another person's behalf, tended to recalibrate the dynamic in a direction that served the memory of the large thing. Cillian had not done this. He looked at her the way he had always looked at her, which was with the attentive absence of a person whose attention was elsewhere and who registered his environment accurately and without editorial. He spoke to her when there was something to say. He did not speak to her when there was not. She found this, on reflection, more disorienting than a shift would have been. Brennan's 3 weeks ended on a Thursday. Sable went back for the follow-up appointment in the morning, and Brennan examined the arm with the careful efficiency of a person for whom careful efficiency was both professional obligation and personal preference. And he told her the healing was complete and that she should expect some residual stiffness for another week or 2, but that full function had been restored and she was free to resume normal activity. She thanked him. He said nothing about the bill, which she had not raised because the single attempt she had made to reach out to his office about it had been met with a response from his receptionist indicating that the account had been settled, which she had taken to mean what it meant and had decided not to spend further energy on. She arrived at the house at her usual time. She put on her work clothes. She went to the kitchen and prepared the morning tray, and she carried it down the hall to Cillian's office, and she knocked and came in, and she set the tray on his desk with her right hand, not the careful, compensating, left dominant carry she had been using for 11 weeks, her right hand, which felt different from how it had felt 11 weeks ago, stiff at the wrist, slightly tentative at the grip, but functional. Hers again in the way that a restored thing was yours, again recognizably the same, and changed by what had happened to it. She set the coffee at his right and the biscuit plate beside it, and she straightened. He looked at her hand, not for long a second, perhaps 2, but with the specific quality of attention that meant he had noticed and was registering it without comment. He looked back at the document he was reading. The 3 weeks, he said, not a question. Yes, she said. He nodded once. He picked up the coffee with his left hand. He was left-handed. She had noticed this in the first week and held it without drinking and looked at the document. Good, he said. She turned to go. Sable. She stopped. Sit down, he said. If you have a moment. She looked at the chair across from his desk, which guests used when they were meeting with him and which she had sat in once before. On the day she had asked him why he had gone past the 3, she sat down in it. He set the coffee cup down. He looked at her with the expression she had come to recognize as his thinking expression, not the closed-off version he used in meetings, but the one that appeared when he was working something out, and had not yet finished working it out but had decided to begin saying it anyway. I want to ask you something, he said. All right, she said. The situation in your building, he said. The housing arrangement, whether it's something you want to continue. She looked at him. The collection operation is gone. Yes. So the reason it was a problem is gone. The immediate reason, he said. Whether it's the arrangement you want to stay in is a different question. She sat with this. The apartment on Pilsen was functional, and not much more than that adequate, in the word she had used for the splint, which she had since started using as a diagnostic. The things in her life that she described as adequate were the things she had accepted because she had run out of energy to want something better. The apartment was adequate. It was close to transit. It was what she could afford on her current income, which was good income, better than she had made before. But income that left adequate apartments as the realistic option in a city where the gap between adequate and better had become, in the years since she had started working, significantly wider. "I'm not suggesting anything," Cillian said. "I'm asking whether it's what you want." "What would the alternative look like?" she said. "There's a residence," he said, "on the property, staff quarters. Historically, though I haven't used them for that purpose, 3 rooms, its own entrance, a pause. It would be available if you wanted it. As part of the employment arrangement, no additional cost." Sable looked at him. She looked at the desk between them, at the document he had set down, at the coffee cup he had placed at a specific angle that she knew, from 11 weeks of observation, was the angle he always used, not deliberate, just habitual, the angle at which his hand naturally set things down. She looked at these things and thought about the word residence and thought about her apartment and thought about the gap between adequate and something that was not adequate, but was also not something she was accustomed to having. "I'd want to see it," she said. "Of course, before I decide anything." "Yes," he said, "and I'd want the arrangement to be formal," she said. "In writing, part of the employment contract. Not informal." He looked at her with something that was not quite acknowledgement, and was more than that, the expression of a man who had made an offer and had the offer received in a way that told him something about the person receiving it. "I'll have the contract amended," he said. She stood. She picked up with her right hand, which was still learning how to be a hand again, the pen she had inadvertently shifted while sitting down, which was on the wrong side of the desk now, and she set it back where it had been. She did not know why she did this. She did it anyway. "I'll look at the residence this week," she said. "Gianna has the key." She nodded. She turned to go. "Sable." She stopped again, the second time in one conversation, which was more than usual. "The arm," he said. "I'm glad it's better." She stood in the doorway for a moment. She thought about the 11 weeks and the pharmacy splint and the long-sleeved shirts in 3 colors and the specific way that adequate solutions stopped feeling inadequate because you stopped having the energy to notice. She thought about a text with no name on it, and a day off without explanation, and a physician in Lincoln Park who had not charged her, and 3 weeks of September light coming through an unlocked window, and a question asked plainly about whether the arrangement she was in was the arrangement she wanted. "So am I," she said. She went back to work. The morning continued. Jordana made noise in the kitchen about something involving a delivery that had not arrived on schedule. The September light came through the windows at the particular angle it came through windows in September in Chicago, and Sable moved through the rooms of the house with both hands. And the house was the same as it had always been, and not entirely the same. And she worked until noon, and then asked Gianna for the key. The residence was at the back of the property, through a garden she had not known was there. It had its own door and 3 rooms and a small kitchen and a window that faced the garden. She stood in it for a while and looked at the window and the garden and thought about adequate. She went back to Gianna and returned the key and said she would let them know by Friday. On Friday morning she came in at 7:55 and went to the kitchen and prepared the morning tray and carried it to Cillian's office with her right hand, the one that was learning to be a hand again. And she set it on his desk, and she said, "I'll take the residence." He looked up from his document. He nodded once. "I'll have the contract ready Monday," he said. "Thank you," she said, for the second time. The first had been for the 15 and the Thursday. This one was for the residence and for the question he had asked before offering it, which was the part that had mattered, the asking of whether the arrangement she was in was the arrangement she wanted. which no one had asked her in a long time, and which had turned out, when asked plainly and without agenda, to be a question that changed the available answers. She went back to work. Cillian went back to his document. The house continued in its running way, and outside September was becoming itself in full. And Sable worked through the morning with both hands, doing what hands were supposed to do, and did not wear a long-sleeved shirt for the first time in 11 weeks, and the September air was exactly the right temperature for it. She moved in on a Sunday, which was not a work day and which she had chosen for that reason, because moving into the residence on the property of the man she worked for was something she wanted to do, in her own time, on her own terms, without it being adjacent to a work day in a way that made it feel like an extension of employment rather than a decision she had made for herself. The residence was, in daylight, better than it had appeared on the Thursday she had looked at it. The kitchen was small but functional. The window that faced the garden was east-facing, which meant morning light, which she had not had in the Pilsen apartment. The 3 rooms were larger than she had thought, which she had thought because the first time she had looked at them, she had been managing the specific narrowing of perception that came from trying to process too much at once. She made 3 trips from the car. She had not owned much before. This was a quality of her life she had stopped evaluating some years back, having determined that the measurement of how much a person owned was not a useful measure of how a person was doing, but that it was worth noting that she owned approximately the amount that fit in a mid-size sedan with the back seat folded down. 3 trips. Then she stood in the main room and looked at the boxes and thought about what to do next, which was unpack them, which she did. Gianna appeared at the garden door at noon, with a pot of something that smelled of garlic and herbs, and set it on the kitchen counter without being asked, and went back through the garden without elaborating. Sable watched her go and thought about the specific vocabulary of a household that communicated primarily through action and which she had been translating for 12 weeks now and was beginning to understand the grammar of. She ate the soup. She unpacked the rest of her boxes. She put her books on the shelf in the order she kept books, which was the order she had read them rather than any other order, which was the kind of organizational system that made sense to the person who had made it and to no one else. Which was, she had concluded, the best kind. She hung her coat on the hook by the door. She put her 3 long-sleeved shirts navy, grey, black in the back of the wardrobe, not because she was doing anything significant with them, but because they were there and they went somewhere, and the back of the wardrobe was the appropriate somewhere. She went to bed in the new room with the east-facing window and slept better than she had since the Thursday, with Pettia and the 2 men, which was not something she had anticipated and which she did not analyze. On Monday morning she went to work, which now meant walking through a garden. This was an adjustment she had not fully considered when she had said, "I'll take the residence on Friday." She had considered the practical aspects, the proximity, the reduction in commute, the elimination of the transit vulnerability that had been, in the period since the arm, a low-level, ongoing concern. She had not considered that going to work through a garden in September, with the morning light at the particular angle it was at in September, and the particular smell that gardens had in September when they were beginning to turn toward the year's end, was going to be the most pleasant part of her workday in a way that she had not had a most pleasant part in some time. She came through the kitchen entrance, which was the service entrance from the garden side, and found Jordana already in motion. She prepared the morning tray. She carried it down the hall to Cillian's office. She knocked. She came in. She set the tray on the desk. He looked up. He looked at her with his standard expression, the attentive absence. And then something in his expression shifted in a way that was small and not performative. The specific shift of a person registering that something has changed in their environment and noting it without comment. She had moved into the residence yesterday. He would know this. Gianna would have mentioned it, or he would have observed it, or both. "You're here early," he said. "I live closer now," she said. He nodded. He looked back at his document. She turned to go. Sable. She stopped. She had started to understand that when he said her name at the moment she was leaving, it was because he had reached the edge of something and had decided to cross it, which he did infrequently and which she had learned to receive without pressure. I want to say something. She turned around. He was not looking at the document. He was looking at her, with the thinking expression, the one that appeared when he was working through something and had decided to begin saying it before he was finished working it through. 12 weeks ago, he said, I noticed the tray. I noticed the way you carried it, and I noticed what it meant, and I did something about it. And I want to be clear that I am not going to ask you to assess what I did or to receive it in any particular way. I'm not telling you this to establish something or to require a response. He stopped. He looked at the desk for a moment and then back at her. I'm telling you because you asked me once why I went past the 3, and I told you both things can be true, which was accurate. I didn't tell you what both things were. Sable stood in the middle of the office and looked at him. The first thing, he said, was what I told you. The information required a complete response. That's true. The second thing he stopped again, briefly. The second thing was that I looked at you carrying that tray with your left hand, and I was angry. Not in the way I am usually angry, which is useful and directed. In a way I haven't been in some time, which was less directed. A pause. I don't say that to explain it. I say it because it's what was true, and you asked me a genuine question and I gave you half of a genuine answer. And I'm giving you the other half now. Sable looked at him for a long moment. She thought about 12 weeks. About the tray and the pharmacy splint and the long-sleeved shirts. About a text with no name that had said the collector won't be coming back. About turmeric soup and a Thursday off, and a physician who had not charged her, and a residence with a garden and an east-facing window. About a question asked plainly as this, the arrangement you want, which had turned out to be the question that changed the available answers. She thought about a man who had been angry in a way that was less directed and had not told her that when she had asked him directly, which was not deception but was the specific holding back of a person who had concluded that certain information was not theirs to offer without being asked for, and who was offering it now. I know, she said. He looked at her. I know that was the second thing, she said. I've known for a while. She paused. I didn't ask because I hadn't decided what to do with it yet. And now, he said. She looked at the desk, and then at him, and then at the morning light coming through the window, which was the same window she had noted 3 weeks ago when it had started letting in September air. Now I live closer, she said. He looked at her for a moment with the expression that was not quite acknowledgement and was more than that, the same expression he had used when she told him she wanted the contract in writing. The expression of a man receiving information in a way that told him something about the person providing it. This time what it told him appeared, from where she was standing, to produce something in his face that was not quite a smile and was in the general direction of one. All right, he said. She picked up the empty cup she had inadvertently brought back. In it had been on the edge of the tray, left over from yesterday, and she had not noticed until she was already in the room. She held it and looked at it, and then set it on the corner of his desk, where it would be easy to take back to the kitchen later. I'll bring you more coffee in an hour, she said. I'll be here, he said. She went back through the hall and through the kitchen and out the garden entrance into the September morning, and stood in the garden for a moment because she had the moment and the garden and the light. And she thought about adequate, and she thought about the specific distance between adequate and what she was standing in, and she thought it was a distance worth noting. She went back through the garden entrance, back to work. The house continued in its running way. Jordana made noise about something. The morning moved forward the way mornings moved, steadily and without waiting for anyone to be ready. And Sable worked through it with both hands, without long sleeves. In September, and the east-facing window of the residence she now lived in was catching light she had not had before, and the day was what the day was. And it was, she found, enough. More than enough. She had not had more than enough in some time. She noted this with the specific attention of a practical person encountering something she had not prepared for, which was the best kind of encountering, which was the kind that required no theory in advance, which required only that you were present and paying attention and willing to let the adequate become something else when something else was what was available. She was all of those things. The morning continued, and she worked, and the garden was there when she needed it, and the house ran, and that was enough to begin with.